My analysis of the James Bond movies continues with the seventh entry in the series, Diamonds Are Forever, released in 1971. Diamonds Are Forever is the first Eon-produced James Bond movie that was designed by a committee. From the first, Dr. No, in 1962, it was agreed that the studio, United Artists, would give Eon the budget and then leave Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman to get on with the actual producing. They had input from Ian Fleming, the directors, the scriptwriters, and even their star, Sean Connery, but in the main, Broccoli and Saltzman called the shots and, up until 1969, everyone agreed that their choices and tastes for the series were impeccable and no one would dare intervene in their creative process. But On Her Majesty's Secret Service dented their reputation. Even though the box office on that movie were good, they were nowhere near the levels that Thunderball had reached. Critically, the movie suffered, and most of the criticism was levelled at the new James Bond, George Lazenby, the director, Peter Hunt, the lack of gadgets, lack of humour, and the downbeat ending. After the movie's release in 1969, events escalated to force changes on Eon Productions going forwards. Lazenby quit the role on advice from his agent at the time, but Saltzman was so livid with his behaviour off camera that he declared to Broccoli that he would never work with him again. But it wasn't only at the sharp end where there was disquiet about Lazenby and the movie as a whole. United Artists weren't happy either. Enter David Picker, then head of the studio. As the man who wrote the checks for the Bond movies, he decided that Eon had lost its way and that he was the man to set them back onto the correct path. His demands were thus: no first-time directors, Bond doesn't cry, the next movie had to recapture the fun and excitement of the earlier ones, and Sean Connery had to come back to the role. Eon too had ideas. They thought that a complete change was the best way forwards, to draw a line under the first 6 films and restart the series, but this time Bond would be an American working for the CIA. This would involve a shift of production base from the UK to America. They agreed with Picker about no first-time directors and courted Guy Hamilton, the director of Goldfinger, to return for the next film. Picker liked that idea. After all, Goldfinger was the benchmark they wanted to return to, and there was even a suggestion that the villain for the next movie could be Goldfinger's brother, thus creating an excuse to cast Gert Fröbe again. Hamilton thought that the new Americanized Bond should be played by Burt Reynolds. Broccoli and Saltzman had actually hired another American, John Gavin, for the role. Picker intervened again and said only Sean Connery would suffice, and was prepared to give the actor pretty much anything he wanted if he were to return to the role. Connery made some stiff demands over wages and a film contract, but they were given to him. So Connery was hired and the whole restarted Americanized Bond idea was ditched. Work would start on the script and the Goldfinger's brother idea was dropped in favour of a return of Ernst Stavro Blofeld as the main villain. So the direct sequel to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Bond out for revenge for the death of his wife, hunting down Blofeld and making him pay, would be the plot. Only it didn't turn out that way. Connery himself was not interested in pursuing that plotline. Picker wanted to draw a line under OHMSS, and given Broccoli and Saltzman's headaches making that movie, they were only too happy to drop virtually all mention of Lazenby's one-off, except that Bond would be after Blofeld. Tracy was not to be mentioned at all. The gritty revenge drama would not happen. Instead, the emphasis would be on fun this time. Diamonds Are Forever would ditch most of the Fleming novel and be a more tongue-in-cheek adventure, but not in a madcap way that Casino Royale 1967 was. The plot would be streamlined and focused, but the details and script would have a lightness of touch with plenty of wit. Credit here must be given to Tom Mankiewicz, whose script fizzes with plenty of off-the-cuff humour. And everyone was happy. Connery was happy that he had his massive paycheck and a chance to sign off from the role, well, almost, with a fun romp. United Artists were happy that Diamonds Are Forever was a big hit at the box office, and audiences were happy to see their James Bond one more time, well, almost, getting into fights, being cool, and firing off some good puns and witticisms. At the time of release in 1971, Everyone was happy with Diamonds Are Forever, and the previous aberrant entry in the series, starring an Australian male model, was pushed to the fringes. In subsequent years, that enthusiasm and fondness for the movie has diminished, whilst the reputation of the aberrant previous entry has risen considerably. Diamonds Are Forever is seen by many as too camp. The set pieces aren't as strong as other entries. Connery looks older, chubbier, and more worn than before. The locations aren't very exotic, and the Bond girl, Tiffany Case, played by Jill St. John, promises much earlier on, but becomes a bit of an idiot later on. The jury's still out on Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd as henchmen, but I personally think of them as one of Mankiewicz's triumphs of script writing, especially the way they seem like an old couple who complete each other's sentences in a macabre way. Not only that, Diamonds Are Forever is not the revenge drama it could have been, and instead, in its attempt to distance itself from OHMSS, it comes across as insulting to its predecessor. In 1971, that wasn't a problem for the audience. They too wanted a fun movie with Connery, action gags, and a Shirley Bassey hit song. Pickering Eon got their hit movie, their short-term fix. However, in the long term, it left a narrative hole when looking at the whole Bond series. Why is the tone so light when Blofeld had Tracy killed? Why is Bond, as played by Sean Connery, so flippant? Why doesn't Blofeld gloat more? It took some time for the series to address Bond's marriage to Tracy. Bit by bit it was referenced, an acknowledgement to the fans, and Moore, Dalton and Brosnan would all get their subtle references to Tracy in subsequent films. But as On Her Majesty's Secret Service is regarded as one of the best films today, it makes Diamonds Are Forever seem like the odd one out, the one without a clear link to its predecessor or its successors. Or is it? Have the writers and producers left us some clues that make sense of the complete tonal shift from OHMSS to Diamonds Are Forever? Now, I'm not suggesting that the production crew of the early 70s have left these clues. Clearly, that's the last thing they wanted to do. But the likes of Michael G. Wilson, Richard Maybaum, and Neil Purvis and Robert Wade might have, if we look closely enough. Now, I'm going to put out what is, at this time, my most outlandish James Bond theory yet, but I think I have some sketchy evidence which I will expand on. What I'm about to describe is not canon, but I think it fits in with the Bond series and makes sense of a lot of things. I can't say for certain that this is what Eon and its team of writers have been thinking all along, so with that caveat out of the way, here's my idea. Diamonds Are Forever is not the gritty revenge drama the fans wanted, but it is a film about Bond's coming to terms with the loss of his wife and his enmity with Blofeld. I am now going to speculate on what happened in those 2 years between the end of OHMSS and the start of Diamonds Are Forever, and I think the later films have left us some clues. First, we jump forwards to The World Is Not Enough and Q's farewell scene. He says this line, "I've always tried to teach you 2 things. First, never let them see you bleed. Then, always have an escape plan." This moment in the film forms the basis of my thesis. My first question is, when did Q try to teach Bond something? Sure, he tells 007 how the gadgets work, or doesn't whenever Bond cuts him off and just drives off. But actually teach Bond something, or reach out to him to offer help. When did that ever happen? As a matter of fact, it happens at the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service at Bond's wedding. Q has a friendly chat with Bond, even addressing him as James for the first time, and offers to help him in anything he needs in the future. Now, Bond cuts Q off at this point and makes a joke about him having all the gadgets this time. But that's not what Q meant, and we can see it in his face. This is the turning point in the relationship between the 2 characters. Desmond Llewellyn, who played Q, said in an interview that he thought the relationship between Bond and Q was like King Arthur and Merlin. This is an interesting comparison. Merlin was, of course, a magician who helped Arthur with magic, much like Q helps Bond with providing gadgets. But Merlin was more than just the court magician. He was Arthur's teacher and guardian. Like Bond, King Arthur was effectively an orphan, and Llewellyn's quote sheds some light on how the Bond-Q relationship evolved over the course of the movies. He went from being a plain-speaking MI6 official in Dr. No and From Russia with Love through to the fussy, irritable technocrat of the subsequent Connery films. But from Diamonds Are Forever onwards, we see that spikiness mellow, and a genuine affection does develop between the two men. So what changed? I believe Tracy's death was the catalyst. So let's speculate on what happened afterwards. Bond is crushed by her death at the hands of his bitterest enemy. So what does he do? What can he do? His plans for a post-MI6 life have been dashed, so the logical thing is to rejoin the service and reactivate his 00 status. But, as we have seen many times in the series, M needs to know if Bond is up to the job. M, in the guise of Sir Admiral Miles Messervy, is not desperate to get a result and keep his job like his successor is in Skyfall, so Bond will be placed on leave until he can prove he can accept a job like any other and not let emotion get in the way. So who is Bond going to turn to at this moment? Who can help build him up again? He's an orphan with no family connections. The friendship with Bill Tanner isn't established in the film series at this point. That leaves M, Moneypenny, Felix Leiter and Q. M isn't going to nursemaid Bond back to active duty. There's that dedication to duty and a certain cold-bloodedness that the head of the Secret Service has to have. Moneypenny is too emotionally close to Bond. There's too much frisson and unrequited love. She has to properly console him. Leiter is an American too far away and has his own CIA business to concern himself with. That leaves Q. Bond will recall Q's comment at the wedding, "If there's anything you need." Q will be the one to console Bond, the one who will help him back to active duty. Bond will call in that favour. Now, Q isn't just an engineer. We know he's a family man as well, as he boasts about making the voice-altering gadget for his kids last Christmas. This gives Q a family perspective that the others don't share. And while Bond is getting his life back in some kind of order, what does Q teach him? Well, that crucial one, never let them see you bleed. But what does that mean? There's the obvious reading, never let your enemies actually see you physically bleed. But there's another meaning, never let them see you bleeding emotionally. To let your enemies see you hurt, upset, angry and emotional will reduce Bond's effectiveness as an agent, particularly a 00, who, as explained in Casino Royale, are half hitmen and half monk. Bond will be filled with sadness and rage over Tracy's death and keen on getting revenge on Blofeld. But Q teaches Bond that to go after him in such a fury would be a mistake. If you find Blofeld, don't let him see you bleed. Don't become emotional when you confront him, because that will give him an advantage over you. This relationship between Bond and Q reaches its apotheosis in License to Kill. Here, Bond is driven to disobey M's orders and goes rogue so he can avenge Felix and Della Leiter. But who should show up and help him when things get desperate? It's Q. Q has been there with James before, instructed him not to let his emotions get the better of him, and here he is now to look after Bond, to see that he's in control of the situation. The Bond-Q relationship is one of mentor and student, or uncle and beloved nephew. A genuine respect and friendship is there, and has come together in similar circumstances to what happened with Bond and Tracy years before. But let's switch attention to the other person most deeply affected by Tracy's death, Marc-Ange Draco, her father. His only cinematic appearance, or even mention, is in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and the same goes for his crime syndicate, the Union Course. He is mentioned in one of the Bond continuation novels, but for now we're confining ourselves to the film series. Draco is a passionate man whose relationship with Tracy was that of deep love, but also fiery outbursts and outlandish ideas on how to shape her life. It's reasonable to speculate that while Bond broods over his future, and with Q's advice taken to heart, Draco instead embarks on a no-holds-barred quest for revenge against Blofeld, but loses. His complete absence from the film series indicates that he's no longer a force or influence, and defeat to Blofeld would explain this. It would also explain how Blofeld can get the money and resources to rebuild Spectre if he's defeated Draco and taken over the Union Course within 2 years. Draco's passion-driven quest for revenge ends in failure, and Bond would instead be cold, rational, and focused. This is what you get in the pre-title sequence of Diamonds Are Forever, as Bond works his way up through the chain of contacts and spies to find Blofeld. But when that happens, or does it actually, given what we know from later on in the movie, Bond's reaction changes again. Blofeld, right from the pre-title sequence, treats Bond like an annoyance. Whilst Bond keeps his emotions in check when confronting Blofeld, Blofeld in turn refuses to gloat too much and treats Bond more like an irritation or inconvenience than a long-standing nemesis. This is underlined when he says, "I don't know why you're here, Mr. Bond. Your pathetic little island hasn't been threatened." Blofeld is a true sociopath, a man who has no close relations, no affections, no ties to anything other than his grand schemes. You see over the course of his appearances that his understanding of human interactions and his line of logic concerning how to treat those who work for him when things go wrong is uniquely twisted. As we saw him from Russia with Love, Thunderball and You Only Live Twice, he often punishes the person who let him down the least out of this perverse logic that examples must be made of. For a man like Blofeld, the killing of Bond's wife, but not making sure 007 perished too, makes perfect sense. It's about setting the example. And after Blofeld has accomplished this, it is of no matter to him anymore. He moves on to the next grand scheme, his emotions in check, his conscience completely dead. How does Bond even deal with a man like this? Getting angry and vengeful serves no purpose here. Blofeld doesn't care for the anger. Draco was presumably angry at him, and now he's completely absent. The way for Bond to deal with Blofeld now is by not showing him that he's hurting, that he's bleeding. Maintain the professionalism and detachment. Yes, Bond is an annoyance to Blofeld, and Bond has to realise this. These men should not be nemesis. Blofeld of this part of the Bond series isn't in it to get back at Bond, and we'll deal with the Oberhauser-Blofeld saga later on. But for now, in this film, 007 is a professional on a mission. Blofeld and Bond are not mirror images of each other. Bond villains who are a reflection of Bond will come later on in the series. Instead, Bond and Blofeld's interactions in this movie are more businesslike. They are professionals in the world of espionage. Bond kills, but doesn't enjoy killing, not even if it's the man who killed his wife. Blofeld is somewhat inhuman in all his guises, and arguably he has descended into a high-functioning madness by the time of Diamonds Are Forever. Charles Gray's performance has a touch of insanity to it, from subsuming his identity via a series of doubles, the needless escape in drag, the frivolous touches to his scheme, and his pathetic appeals for his Batha sub to be readied and deployed. Bond can see this pathetic side to Blofeld by now. The insane criminal genius is too far gone to be personally angry with. So he toys with Blofeld at the end. This is something he wouldn't have done in You Only Live Twice or on Her Majesty's Secret Service. The trail of clues he follows to find the diamonds through various fences, contacts and henchmen, ending up discovering that Blofeld has taken the identity and resources of Willard White, shows a Blofeld scheme that is more twisted and convoluted than previous ones. When they do confront for real in White's office, Bond can see Blofeld not just as a scheming villain, but a mad one at that. There's no way Bond can follow Blofeld down that spiral by being rage-filled and on a vendetta, and it won't be the last time Bond will deal with a villain whose vanity conceals madness either. But Diamonds Are Forever is a good primer for those confrontations in the future. But as I said, this is all speculation. In 1971, everyone got their wish with Diamonds Are Forever. Going forwards, some ingredients from the film would carry on. Hamilton and Mankiewicz will be retained for the next two films, and Bond has been freed from his anguish over his wife's death. Well, for now. But the short-term fix was done. Now the long-term choice of James Bond had to be addressed. Many would fit the bill, but David Picker had reduced the choice to just one actor. The safest pair of hands they could find. The actor who would fit in well with the Hamilton-Mankiewicz creative team. It also helped that he knew Cubby Broccoli, and that he got on with him. This series will return.